Welcome back, everybody. Definitely thank you for tuning in this week. Definitely want to say it is good to be back. Harriet, how are you doing?
All is well. It's Monday. I made it. How are you?
I am great. I'm great. I mean, our adventures over the weekend. How's your car doing?
Mercedes said they'll have a tire by tomorrow. One tire, $560. One tire, but it's
Oh,
all good.
wow.
Yeah. So
Okay.
apparently the tires were run flat tires, and we could have driven another 50 miles on that tire in that condition. But we were 73 miles from my house, so that wouldn't have helped us. Somebody come get me. Thank God for Terrell. Terrell was willing to get out in the rain and find a tight. So if you don't follow me on social media, Terrell and I were on a ministry work assignment on Friday. Beautiful time down in Clement, Georgia. Was a church we just brought on as clients of ours. And on the way home, we hit a pothole that was so bad it blew my tire. I was not speeding. I was in the lane getting ready to exit. We had our flashers on, but the pothole was so bad. It was filled with water because it was raining so hard you couldn't see. And when we hit it, I said, "Oh, that doesn't sound good." And my tire pressure went from 37 to zero real quick.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. And I think an emphasis on you weren't speeding like it was raining
oh,
hard, so we were driving below the speed
yeah,
limit.
yeah, we were. And so yes, I-95 SCDOT fix South Carolina roads. The infrastructure in South Carolina is terrible. It's terrible. Now, people, I didn't know the process, so apparently I can file a claim with somebody and do something. I really don't have time for all of that, so I'm gonna get me a tire. But for real, for people who this isn't fair to people, it's not fair, right?
Yeah.
Fix the roadways. So anyway,
Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, especially when you consider like when the guy that was towing us finally pulled up, he said, "Let me guess." And he knew the exit
he
where
did. He
it
was like
happened
exit
to. And I'm just
82. I said what? He said it was the fourth one this week. Terrible.
so I'm just like, you know what? It was part of the adventure for the weekend. But like I said, it was good that we got a chance to get down to, a church that where we're going to be doing some great work with, helping them kind of navigate some of the stuff we talk about on the show. It's just on the way home between the rain, the potholes, like the extra 2 to 3 hour delay.
Right.
Um it was an interesting weekend.
I enjoy spending the time with you though. It was productive. It was productive.
Yes.
Even in the rain. Terrell can work anywhere. We were at a gas station. Terrell pulled out his laptop and got to working, and I'm glad he did because when he pulled out his laptop, I realized I had left mine in Georgia at the church. So I felt like the song from Crooklyn: one, two, three, the devil's after me. Four, five, six. But in spite of, all is well. All is well. It's all good.
Yeah, so yeah, definitely a good weekend. And I think it gave us a chance to talk about some things. I think were with being a what I love is being able to actually talk to churches and talk to pastors, talk to ministers, and actually get a sense from their mouths what they see some of the problems are. And definitely there are a lot of legal and tax situations that ministers, pastors, churches, they're just not getting good insight, or they're just not getting any insight on.
Right. I agree. In that scripture, I think it's somewhere in the scripture. I can't remember the chapter and verse, but it says, "My people perish for lack of knowledge." So it's not that your ministry doesn't have the right heart, have the desire to do good, but you can't do what you don't know. So a lot of churches don't have what they need because they're not getting good counsel. So Terrell and I are trying to use the gifts that God gave us to be good counsel for kingdom minded businesses, churches, and people. That's it.
Absolutely, absolutely. And the topic we talked about last week was, church run schools or religious schools. And I think this one has become more of a mainstream topic after some of the Supreme Court decisions. People have been looking at, like, some states have decided to allow, parents to use vouchers at private schools. And in some of those cases, that also includes, some privately run religious schools as well. So it's like it's becoming more of a topic now. One of the things that I notice is as it becomes a topic of like, hey, the possibility for you to use, like I say, vouchers or state funded vouchers, or I really don't like the term state funded. I'm gonna just say vouchers because
Okay.
the funds are actually coming from the taxpayers.
Right.
So taxpayer funded vouchers, let's put it that way, that people can use. What that also means is there's gonna be more scrutiny that comes up. So churches, you need to have your stuff in order. And then that also brings out a lot of critics because there are some people who are highly against that happening, and so you bring out a lot of critics. And I think a lot of times when churches don't have their affairs in order, they end up getting caught in the crossfire of the back and forth between people who are for and against it, and end up getting suffering some severe damage because they didn't. Now, last week we talked about a lot of the legal side. And Harry, did you want to mention anything else about the legal side from last week, or did any questions come in?
So I got a few questions, but my recap is, and since I took up all the time last week from Terrell, I'm going to give him time on the finance side today. But I had a list of the top things you need to consider on the legal side, and there were, I think, certification requirements. What do your church bylaws state as a statement of faith? What do you believe? The liability needs to be squared away. Proper personnel and training, risk management, again, that's liability, safety concerns for your staff and your children. So that's my high level overview. But we're going to do a deep dive on the financial side. If you guys still have questions about the legal side, as always, inbox us in the group or send us a message. We will respond.
Absolutely. Now, one of the things that I find to be very interesting is that even in doing more of the research and digging into the tax side, you'll find that there's a very close line between tax related topics and then legal related topics. So I'm gonna go ahead and share this screen because I think it'll be helpful for like the people that are viewing. Now, for the people that are listening on the podcast, we will do our best to explain what is on the screen since you're not watching it, but you can also watch it on Facebook, you can watch it on YouTube. And one of the new things we're working on is to allow people to be able to listen to it on podcast, because we know some people may not be able to physically watch it, but they may be able to listen to it, whether you're out running or whether you're driving or whatever. So we are trying to get the information to you the best way we can. Now, so a couple of things that I want to say is, and I'm going to post this in the group. Now, when it comes down to the tax side of it, a couple of perspectives that you want to keep in mind is that if your church is trying to start a church run school or a church religious school, is how you organize it matters. So when it comes down to integral in organization, meaning like the school is operated as a part of the church, because you could have that scenario, or you can have a scenario where the school is actually has its own 501c3, it has its own documentation, and it operates separately. Now, I know that when it comes down to that, there is the tax side of it. And I think there is a legal component to where you do want to make sure you get legal insight or legal input on, like, hey, from a legal standpoint, what are the implications we need to be aware of if we keep the school attached to the church, or if the school is established as something that is separate.
Can I chime in? I always personally prefer that separate business entities under even the same organization be established separately. I like to limit liability to one entity at a time. So if something goes wrong with the church, God forbid, then the school can still go. Or if something goes wrong with the school, then the church can still go. But when all married together, that can bring issues. So I like stuff to be structured separately on the legality side. And if you want to, there's ways that you can tie it in all together corporately, but I like for stuff to be established separately. Personal preference. It makes it cleaner.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, and I think that there are some, from a tax side, right, is what I would say is whether you have them together or you have them separate, that is probably going to be more of a legal question. And I know a lot of people reach out to me because I'm a CPA and they're like, hey, which one should I pick? And I always say that tax is just one part of your scenario. When it comes down to setting up your organization, filing that incorporation, it is more of a legal impact than it is a tax impact, because a lot of people just do and say, hey, well, I'm just going to do this because it works for my taxes, but don't realize it exposes them to a lot of liability, and they don't find out until they have an issue. But like I said, I'll kind of talk through both, I guess, give a perspective on both. Now, the other thing is, when it comes down to filing a Form 990, like if you are a church organization, you usually don't have to file a Form 990. So even if you are a not-for-profit church, the name of the tax return or the tax information is called a 990. So a lot of times churches are like, oh, we're a church, we don't have to file it. But if you end up having a significant amount of income that comes from something that is not directly related to your church, you may find yourself in a situation where you do have to file a Form 990. And I think a lot of churches end up missing that. And if you miss that, what that could lead to is, if you fail to file it, then that's where the IRS starts digging a little bit more, and there could be some penalties. Now, one of them that I want to spend, as I mentioned, this one probably leans a little bit to, kind of legal as well, is if you are a school. I think it might have been in 1983 or maybe in the 1970s, the Supreme Court ruled that if you are a tax exempt organizations, a tax exempt school, you have to have a non-discrimination, clause or non-discrimination policy. If you are a school, whether your school is integrated with the church or whether it is separate, every school that is that is tax exempt must have a racial non-discrimination certification that they file annually. Now, what goes into your racial non-discrimination certification? Now, that one's a little bit more of a legal question of what goes in it. But what I will say is, from a tax standpoint, the IRS says you have to have a policy about this, and you have to file it on an annual basis. Anything you want to share on a racial non-discrimination clause?
No, that is from a 1983 Supreme Court case, and so you just can't do it. I mean, you got to follow the rules. You just file the form. That's all I'm saying. File the form. It's not optional. It's not non-negotiable. The Supreme Court has spoken. It came out in '83. In the early '80s, they was cracking down on affirmative action. Just file the form. That's all. I won't get into the whole legal. It's required, folks. That's it. It's required.
and, and one thing I will say is, for those that, if you decide to have your church connected with, or the school connected with the church, meaning like all in one entity, if you fail to file this form, then in some cases, the IRS, the penalty is you lose your tax exempt status. Well, if your school and your church are in one organization and you fail to file this for the school, you could very well put your church in jeopardy of losing its tax exempt status because you didn't file the form. And so I would say, for anyone who is trying to run a school, is you definitely want to make sure that you file this form on an annual basis. And if you've been running a school and you haven't filed it in the past, just start. All
Like,
right.
yeah, definitely start now. And I say that because churches are the one place in America. Sunday mornings in America are the most segregated times, even now today in 2022. We have some churches where it's, everybody come, but the reality is most folks, when it still comes to churches, because it couldn't be regulated by the government, they're still very separate on Sunday mornings. And so the Form 5578 is so important for your schools, because if you are an all black church or all white church or all Latino church, right? Not by, we're trying to do it. It's just kind of, churches are still pretty much segregated in this country. And so the form is even more important, because you might not even know that this is required, right? And so it's like, if your church members or your neighborhood folks go to your church. So I'm glad that Terrell is sharing this. So if you didn't know before, now you know, right? File the form.
Yeah. And I'm gonna talk a little bit more about it because there are some specifics there that I think we should really keep in mind. And like I said, I'll post this list in the group because I do think the good thing about it is if you are a church, or let's say you work in a church, and your church is considering starting a religious school or a church run school, even if it's a preschool. I mean, what I would definitely say is take a screenshot of this page. And what you should probably do is have a conversation with your accountant, have a conversation with the people that are giving you advice or that are advising your church organization. And just tell them, hey, we would like to have a conversation about these topics to make sure that, hey, our organization is good in these areas. And if you don't have an advisor, you don't have someone on the legal side or someone on the accounting side to actually talk to or to advise your church, definitely reach out to us. Like I said, we're all we know our part. Like, look, I would say is that Harriet knows the legal, and I know the finance and the accounting side. If you need some help, reach out and ask for the help, because I think one of the worst things you can do is just try to Google something online
Don't do it.
and
Don't do it. I tell people all the time, do not confuse your Google search with my law degree, Alter Rails finance, CPA exams, all of that. Don't do it. That's it.
No, one of the things that I will say is that, and I think, like I said, I'll post this. I do think what I tried to do here is split it up, and like I said, we'll post this in the group so people can see more of it. But the piece that I wanted to spend a little bit more time on was the racial non-discrimination, because I do think this touches on a bit more of, like we said, is you have to get it filed. The other piece I do think that becomes relevant is that the IRS recommends that your board is the one that approves the policy. So I think this goes back to a conversation that we had before about having a board. So when it comes down to, let's say a church wants to start a school, if the school is part of the church, question is, does the board that oversees the church, are they now also responsible for overseeing the school as well? What are your thoughts on that one?
So, because my preference is to set everything up separately, in my purview, if it's separated, if it's a separate entity, the school should have its own board. If the school is a part of the church normally, then yeah, you could use your own board. But I just like separation, because are the people who are on your church board familiar with education, right? So do we have board members who are really astute and wise and aware of the things and the matters that are prevalent and relevant to a school? And so that's why sometimes I don't just like just bring it under this umbrella. Your board should be informed. We start a 501c3 or whatever. Your board should be informed and composed of people who can make really great contributions to that organization, your mission, and what you're doing. Right. And so if I got a bunch of pastors from another church on my board or church board, and they don't know anything about education or schools, if I put them over my school board, are they really informed to make the best decisions for this academic institution? That my answer would be no. Right. So
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, because one of the things that I've seen a lot of organizations start to get into is, let's say if you want to start bringing in grants or funding, specifically for the school, you need people who actually have an understanding of that subject matter on your board to make sure that they're providing you with some advice and some guidance. Because what I have seen is people say, the pastor standing up says, oh, we're going to start a board, and they start picking just some people that they're friends with,
mhm,
and none of these people have experience with the subject matter, and
right,
then the
right,
church ends up getting into trouble.
mhm,
And what I have seen happen is, when from an IRS standpoint, if the church has an unqualified board and the church ends up getting in trouble, a lot of times the pressure is going to come down on, well, who picked these unqualified people?
Exactly.
and we're going to hold that person responsible.
Exactly.
Now, one of the things that I also, also think about is, as we talked about, that's why it matters, kind of what Harriet was saying about, whether you have a the school is part of the church or whether it's a separate organization. If it's part of the church, then what pastors will need to tell their board is, hey, you guys or ladies or whoever is on the board are responsible for also what happens in this school, which means there should be regular reporting about what's going on with the school with the board. Because when the IRS or when the law looks at it and says, well, these are the names of the board members you have, something went wrong, we want to talk to everybody.
Hmm.
And when that starts to happen, I would say is, if the board is not informed about what is going on in, the school, there's no way in the world that they can speak to things if they are questioned or if they are asked to provide representation for things. So it becomes the board aspect becomes very, very important. Now, one of the other things that I think that is very important that came up when I was doing the research is, because you have, the racial non-discrimination policy is such a big part of any type of school. Another thing that you have to keep in mind is that you also have to make that policy public. Meaning you can't just have the policy and say, well, the teachers know the right decision, or the people know, the administrator knows the right decision. Like, it has to be documented and included in some of the publications, the brochures, the website, the different things that you share. Because one of the things that the IRS says is, one is, if you fail to file the form or to actually document it, the IRS will assume that your organization approves racial discrimination and will hold you liable for it. Because it's one of those things, like, I'm curious from a legal standpoint, but in accounting we have one of these sayings that if it's not documented, it doesn't exist.
Same. Same. Same exact thing in the legal world. Uh, we often say it's not what you know, is what you can prove. And if it's not documented, it doesn't exist. And so that's why policies, procedures, following the rules, checklists, all this good stuff, minutes from your board meeting, all sorts of documentation, especially when you are tax exempt. It's necessary because you're fine until you get on the government's radar. But when they come in, you need to have stuff prepared and ready for them. If not, there are severe consequences.
Absolutely. And I think that's one of those things that more light is being, shined on that. I mean, with the recent bill that just got passed in Congress with, $80 billion going to the IRS, and they're wanting to expand their technology, they're wanting to expand their staff. And one of the things that we do know is, as their technology improves and as their staff expands, they may have more time and resources to look
Check.
at things and to question things that they didn't have time for in the past.
That's it. They are building an army over there. So before, where my church, oh, we're not on their radar. More time, more resources means they have more time to dig into you. So just cross your T's and dot your I's.
Yeah. And some of the obvious things I think is really just quickly checking, is the religious school filing the correct paperwork? I mean, if you're not filing the correct paperwork, that's going to be flag number one. Because for you to have a school, you have to register that school with some organization. Like, whether it's you're going to file it as a 501c3, an LLC, a for profit, however you register it, it's registered somewhere. And
Right.
so what's going to be a simple check is, okay, they're registered. Did they file the right forms? And they'll be able to look in the system. If you haven't filed the right forms, that's going to be the first flag in the system that says, hey, we might need to look at this organization to find out what's going on. And
Right.
so I always tell people, the first thing is, at least just file the right paperwork. I mean, that's going to be step one.
Right.
Um, And then, like I said, there are some things that are a little bit more involved, and the reason why I think we labor on this point about the board's oversight is because I think a lot of people don't understand the responsibility that the board has over the organization or over the governance of the organization. For example, when it comes down to the board, some of the things that the board should also be looking at from a financial standpoint is any key employee for the school. The board should be doing a compensation review for that person. And if that person has any direct blood relatives that are hired in the school, the
Mm.
board also has to review that for like related party transactions and stuff like that.
Nepotism.
Um,
Nepotism is real in churches and workplaces, period. But you really have to be careful, especially when you're bored. I call it closer related people. So if you have a board of a husband, a wife, and a first cousin, or a husband, a wife, and a homeboy, a homegirl, right? Similar interests. So now your board is approving decisions. So let's say for the husband is the headmaster at the school and also on the board because that happens, right? So we're on the board and we're CEO, right? And then we hire the wife and we're going to give her $50,000 raise. Not justified, not explained, no comp study. These are the scenarios where the IRS, I'm for real, the IRS comes in and has a field day because it happens. And I think it happens because maybe people aren't aware that you have to have checks and balances. You can't just unilaterally, even though it's tax exempt. You can't just unilaterally do things that benefit you that is not justified and can't be explained.
Absolutely. And that's one of those things that comes up a lot because, I was looking at some of the, prior lives that we had done, and there was a question that came up from someone of person asked is, can the pastor hire their spouse to be the associate pastor in the church? And so I wanted to bring that question up because, like I said, I love when you guys ask questions. Leave them in the comments, drop them in the group. So like I said, we'll do our best to work them in. And I think this is a perfect place to kind of talk about, answering that question. And I guess I'll start with my answer first, and then I'll hand it off to you, Harriet. So when it comes down to related parties, whether it's a school or whether it's just in the church, one of the things that the board should be doing is the board should be looking at that and actually approving, does this make sense for the organization? So the board should not just be handing that responsibility over to the pastor because oftentimes, well, first, I think the board should actually lay out in the bylaws who makes hiring decisions,
Mhm.
whether that's the pastor or whether that's someone else. But if it is a related party, the board has to weigh in, and it should be documented in the minutes. What did the board approve about, or did the board approve this, or did the board not approve it? And then when it comes down to whatever the compensation is, then the board should definitely be looking at that saying, what is this person going to do? And then they should do some type of comparison, even if that's going out to, let's say, salary.com or doing some Google searches or talking to employment agencies to say, hey, what if we hired a third party, a perfect stranger, apply for this job, what would be a fair salary that we would pay that person? And then you have to compare it. Okay, what are we saying we should pay, the pastor's spouse, or what are we saying we should pay the pastor's cousin? And the board has to be on record, or should be on record, as, did you approve or did you disapprove of this?
I
What are
agree.
your thoughts on that?
I agree with all of that. Your bylaws should have a nepotism policy, right? And it's not that the pastor's spouse cannot be retained. I'm not saying that, but you should have a nepotism policy. That policy should spell out how those matters are handled, board review and approval. The spouse needs to be qualified. She should not just get the job because she sleeps with the pastor. Right? Part of my candidates, is she capable? Or he capable? You know what I'm saying? What experience, education do they have? That should be discussed amongst the board. There should also be provisions in your policy when it comes to annual reviews, salary increases. they should not report directly to their spouse for those types of matters because you want it to be impartial. So a good nepotism policy, those rules should just be spelled out, and then the board should review it, vote on it. It should be well documented in your minutes, and then you can move forward with it. So it's not impossible that it cannot be done, but it's how it's done that matters. So like
Absolutely,
if a board has
absolutely.
a policy that you need 2 staff members to sign off on a check, well, the sign off on the check don't need to be the husband and wife team. You need somebody. I'm serious. These things happen, right? You need somebody there so it looks impartial. And it's not that the husband and wife will do anything wrong. You probably won't. But for checks and balances, for the IRS and for the Lord, because the Lord sees you even when the IRS does it. And I want to stress that to churches. The Lord sees you even when the IRS does it. And I'm more concerned of God than I am of the government. So just keep those things in mind, okay?
Absolutely. And one of the things that I also mentioned is that, this is not something that's just there to add a onerous layer of bureaucracy to stop, the church from making the right decision. It's also there to protect the church and to protect the pastor. Because one of the things that I've seen is that churches end up splitting and there's this commotion that happens because some of the members are like, well, the pastor just decided to hire his wife for that position, and there are other people who are qualified for it, and that's because the pastor's family is just trying to take more money from the church. And I'm like, you know what? That it might have been the right decision for the pastor to hire their spouse, but because nobody else was involved in that
Right.
decision, now everybody else is in their feelings, and the things that they are saying, there's no way for the pastor to even dispute that, to say like, hey, we did a legitimate search, and one of the things I've seen is where then pastors get mad and they get angry and
And
then their
tell it.
sermons start
And I
changing.
said, they tell it off from the pulpit. Inappropriate. Just lacking emotional intelligence. Do not take out your staff and church grievances on the pulpit on Sunday morning or Wednesday evening. Stop it. The Lord did not give you that to preach, but you need to clear your conscience. Y'all don't listen to me and Terrell. Terrell got more tact than me. I'm gonna tell you the truth. Inappropriate.
but I mean I don't think there's any way that any other way that you can talk about that, because I think some people need to hear it that way. They
Yeah.
need to hear it direct and straight, because when I have seen it, because I will say the number of videos that I see of ministers standing in the pulpit saying something that is just like, that ain't got
Mm,
nothing to
nothing.
do with you preaching the word. That's like you just getting up there, holding the mic, sharing your feelings in front of a couple hundred people. And then when people start leaving the church, then
Now
you get
you're in
in
your
your
feelings.
feelings.
That's it. Don't vent from the pulpit. Get a therapist. Pastors need therapists too. And I believe in prayer, Jesus, the Holy Ghost, tongues, and all of that. God made therapists. Find you another venue for that, okay?
Absolutely. And also, I mean, just to reemphasize of, that's where your board adds a layer of protection for the decision making processes concerning key employees and relatives that are employed. Because when something like that comes up, where the pastor can stand up and the pastor can say, if someone asks them, yes, the board was brought 4 candidates. The board this and the board voted on it. And as a pastor, because the person was related to me, I was not allowed to vote on it. The
Yes.
board voted on it, and this is the decision that they came to. Even if you want to take it a step further, I wasn't in the room when they voted. I just got the results,
So
because
they
I
can
think
have
what that does is it just increases the integrity of your organization. It increases the integrity of the decision, and it protects the members. It protects you. It protects the person you hired, and it protects the mission that the church is after. So they're not distracted by a bunch of unnecessary drama.
I love that. These rules are to protect you, right? These steps are to protect you. Like I said, there are a lot of churches doing it right. Some churches don't know that these are the steps, but when done this way, no one can question your integrity. And right, and so that, like he said, that if they'll trust you with the business, then they'll trust you with bringing the word of God, right? And so they won't leave your church. They probably give to you more because you do present as an honest man or woman of God. So these things are to help you and your ministry and not impede not only the business of the church, but the reason why we have church, to allow people to find God and grow in Him. And that's what we want to do. That's it.
Absolutely. Well, thank you guys for tuning in. We will be back with more discussions next week on church law and finance matters, things that churches need to know about the administrative and the organizational side of running their church. So until next time, thank you for tuning in.